great to be here today. I'm sure many of you will have seen the information around the Crimson Inspired Partnership, so it's good to be here as partners today. And also great to be here with Jamie, who I'll introduce to you just now as well. And you'll get a lot of information about both the US and UK application process and requirements during the session that we'll have. Just to introduce myself quickly, I head up Crimson in South Africa. We've got an office in Johannesburg, and we've also got representation in the Cape. So Kyle is here today, and he works out of our space in Cape Town. So just a little bit about Crimson for those of you who haven't seen a lot of detail about us. So we're a global education company, an education technology company, and we work with students on all aspects of the admissions and application process. So there's a little bit more detail just in terms of what we do. So we help students with every ingredient that matters in their application and high school experience. So your journey for some students, grade 8 up until you head off to university, for some, from grade 12. So what do we mean by these different things? So what we work on with our students, academic tutoring. For some students, that's IEB tutoring to help lift marks in order to gain top marks. For others, it could be standardized test tutoring, so SAT tutoring, ACT tutoring, for those doing different curricula, A-level tutoring, and so on. Extracurricular and leadership mentoring, so what that means is for the US, working on big leadership projects that are required by top schools. Schools are really interested in innovative leadership, as we call it, not just institutional leadership. And Jamie will talk a little bit more about what that means as well. For the UK, it's often around academic work. So if you're interested in studying medicine, what academic reading have you done? What research projects have you done aimed towards medicine that will help in your application? Application and essay support. Was chatting to one of the moms the other day, one of our students who headed off to Brown. He's now in his second semester at Brown, and she was talking to other moms, and what she said was that Dan applied to 12 universities in the US. By the end of the process, he'd written 23 essays in matric in order to apply to the top schools that he did apply to. Dan in the end got into Brown and UC Berkeley and chose to go to Brown. So application and essay support that we work on, and Jamie will talk a little bit about what makes a good essay, because it's quite different from the way we traditionally write in South Africa, and different for the UK and different for the US as well. And admissions consulting. So a key part of what's difficult for international students is determining which schools you're most competitive for. So, you might, like Dan, for example, had a high-risk strategy of applying to all the top schools, but you might want to be a little bit more conservative and make sure that you have, some reach schools. Maybe Brown is your reach school, Harvard is your reach school, and you have target schools as well. So working with students in terms of what are you most competitive for, where you can maximize your chance of admission and minimize your chance of rejection as well. What should your test prep strategy look like? When are you writing the SATs? When are you preparing for the SATs? When should you write subject tests? Should you write subject tests? All of that is built in. And what courses are you going to be applying to as well? Maybe that's different for the US and UK, different programs at different schools as well, maybe less competitive programs. You want to apply to more competitive schools in the US. Once you apply to a program and get in, you can then change when you're in university. So all of those kinds of considerations are worked out with a strategist. And that's how we do it. So a student gets a pretty big team, a high-level team behind them. Our strategist is the person that, for every student, that would have oversight over your program. Our strategists are full-time professional Crimson employees, and they're graduates of top universities themselves, like Harvard, Yale, Oxford on the UK side, and so on. They oversee a student's program and work on your strategy throughout your time with Crimson, whether that's from grade 8 or whether it's from grade 11 or 12 as well. And then you can see there the team that we then have behind a student. So in application year, our students have an essay mentor, application mentor. They may have some extracurricular and leadership mentoring, academic tutoring as well, including SATs and so on. And that's how we do some of that work. So as a Reddam school, you all get access to the Crimson app. The Crimson app is super valuable when it comes with a Crimson team. But certainly as a Reddam student, you get access to that. So you get access to diagnostic tests, practice SAT tests, and you get access to a template roadmap. For students who do work with us, as Crimson students, a strategist would build out a roadmap for a student. And that really is, what do you need to do and by when do you need to do it? There's lots of parts of an application, particularly for top schools, the US being more complicated even than the UK. So really what you can see in front of you there is really just one piece of the application process, keeping track of activities, milestones and deadlines that you would have for that. And really that's why we see the great results that we do see. So for the US, 98% of Crimson students were accepted into at least one of their top 8 schools in the US, and 100% of Crimson students were accepted into 2 of their top 5 UK choices as well. So really great results that are brought about by a really high-level team, an expert team that comprising, a strategist, tutors and mentors covering all different areas of an application. I am though going to introduce Jamie, who I'm sure you'll get a lot out of hearing from today. So Jamie is Crimson's founder and CEO. Not much older than you are, so that should be inspiring and aspirational. Jamie went to Harvard. Jamie applied to the world's top schools, got into all of them, chose to go to Harvard where he finished 2 years ahead of schedule. One of the youngest ever admits into Stanford, into an MBA program, and ahead of starting his PhD as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. So Jamie, absolutely best positioned to talk to you about applications to top universities on both sides of the pond. So you'll get a chance to ask Jamie some questions at the end as well. Thanks very much, Jamie. I'll hand over to you.
Awesome, guys. I'm really excited to be here. It's actually my first time in Cape Town, so it's so cool to see so many faces in the room. I'm going to do a quick deep dive today in the US and the UK application process. I want to show you guys what it takes to apply, some of the things you should be aware of that really will benefit your candidacy, and how to think about what schools to go to, and some sort of debates you should have with yourself. So, first of all, why is the US and UK, pretty attractive? Basically, the US and UK have, 20, of the top 20 universities in the world, about 15 to 16 are in the US and UK. So what you can see basically, here's QS World University rankings. This is probably one of the 3 best rankings around the world that shows you across the whole world, across South Africa, China, New Zealand, US, etc., what ranking of different schools. This is a great resource because, ranking is definitely important as one factor to consider in your school's reputation. Now here you can see basically, all these different schools, for example, like Stanford, Harvard, etc. Interesting ones to call out, Tsinghua is actually in China. It's ranked 16th now, so they're doing pretty well. So if you want to learn Mandarin, quite an interesting option, although not that popular here. In South Africa, we've got some very, very good universities, so that's actually wonderful. Many countries that we operate in, the local universities aren't so good, but here you've got some good options. The best school we have here is UCT, so in your backyard, that's ranked around 200. You've got, for example, Johannesburg ranked around 501. So when you think about this, position yourself on this global ranking and think about what level you want to shoot for, and make sure that you're applying to schools that basically are worth the investment, etc. Now, what are the key types of US universities? There's a couple of different schools. First up is the Ivy League. Now this is what we hear about from movies, from TV shows, from things like Suits. The Ivy League is a group of 8 top schools that basically, were an athletics conference. And over time they've become known to be very academic. So these are schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Brown. The student that Rebecca mentioned is a South African student that we just got into Brown, which is a wonderful win. Private colleges. These basically are schools that aren't funded very much by the government and have a lot of choice in how they run the school. So schools like Stanford, which are very, very popular for top athletes, for example, and top academic students, fits in that category. Liberal arts colleges, this is quite interesting because in the US you have a liberal arts degree. So what's a liberal arts college? It's basically a school that has only undergraduate teaching. So if you, for example, go to a school like a Harvard, there is, MBAs, like there's medical schools, etc. These schools focus on undergrad only. The professors come there just to teach undergraduate students, and as a result, the teaching quality is very high. But it's not for everyone because they're quite small schools. So that's some of the popular ones: Amherst, Swarthmore, Williams. Now we've got the single-sex colleges, Wellesley and Barnard. These are all girls' schools, so probably half you guys maybe shouldn't be thinking about this. And then public colleges, many of the world's top public colleges in America. So in California, I just spent 2 years in sunny California. It was great fun at Stanford. University of California has some of the best schools in the world: UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Irvine, etc. So many of my students here in South Africa will apply to all the UCs. It's a great option. They take obviously competitive applicants, but at the same time it's not the most difficult in the world to get into some of these schools. So why do you consider a liberal arts program? So I guess at Harvard, in my degree, there were 32 courses. Of that, around 14 were my main major, or applied math economics. I had 8 more in my secondary, which was global health, pretty relevant with this virus running around. And then basically we had 8 more for general education, which are things like, electives like business in China, entrepreneurship, negotiation, as well as some electives you can take. So, when I was your age, going through high school, even though I was really well researched, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in the future. When I was 14, I wanted to do medicine. When I was 18, I thought I wanted to work on Wall Street. And that's pretty normal to have those uncertainties. So this system benefits you because basically you have, about 18 months of your degree to experiment, try, test new things, and there's room to explore. What are the US looking for? Fundamentally, all the competitive skills you should be thinking about are looking for well lopsided candidates. These basically are students that are pretty good in 1 or 2 main areas. It could be rugby, it could be debate, it could be math Olympiad, whatever. And then a broad base of activities like community service, school leadership, all that stuff. So you want basically that T shape, with broad-based base and then a narrow focus. Now, when you think about the US, most of the competitive skills require these various conditions. So on the academic side, most of the schools you should be thinking about require the SAT or the ACT. Some schools, for example, like NYU, don't require the SAT. They'll take, for example, 3 subject tests instead. But generally speaking, most candidates applying should do the SAT or the ACT because most of the top schools like Harvard won't look at you unless you have one of those 2 credentials. Now, next up, you have your South African qualifications and your academic transcript. What this means basically is within the school, in your last 4 years of high school, all your grades actually matter. When you apply for the UK, they don't actually care too much about how well you perform, say in grade 10 inside the school. They care about your final results. But for the US, they want to know how well you did over your last 4 years. So it's kind of an incremental journey, which is why starting on the earlier side is quite important. Then you've got the activities. So in the US, they actually really care about extracurriculars. This is great for you guys because I go to South Africa, Korea, China. I go to schools in the middle of Beijing where the kids are ferociously academic, but they don't do any sports, any extracurriculars, etc. And that doesn't work very well for the US process. So what they love is well-rounded students. And here in South Africa, there's a great culture of leadership, of sports, of community service. So all that will help you. You need 10 activities over 4 years, and that includes everything from school extracurriculars to clubs, etc. Then there's the essays. So generally there's one main essay, the Common Application Essay, that goes to all the schools on the system, and then there's basically a bunch of other schools or supplementary essays, questions like why Stanford, why UCLA, that you can answer. And then there's the interviews. Now most of the top schools will do some kind of alumni interview. Often that will be online, but it can be in person sometimes for some of the schools. So when you apply for the US, here's some of the key dates you should be aware of. Now, given that we're working very closely with your school here, we can definitely provide more guidance, but basically nuts and bolts is in your last year, which I believe is grade 12 here in South Africa. 1st of November is the early decision or early action date. This is very important to remember because when you apply for the US, there's a lot of strategy involved. When you apply in the early round, basically you've got about a 2 or 3 times higher rate of getting in than if you apply in the general round. So let's take a school like Columbia, an amazing Ivy League school, made famous from Gossip Girl. Basically, when you apply in the early round, the hit rate of getting in is about 25%, but the hit rate getting in normally is, more like a 5%. So that's a huge variance in odds based on when you apply. So be aware of that. 1st of Jan is all your regular applications. So most of our students, we're applying to a couple of schools in the early round or 1, then a bunch more in the regular round. And then you have, the standardized tests. You've got to do some leadership stuff, and then you want 2 recommendation letters, typically from school subject teachers. You want your personal statement, at a good level and in an interview. What role does testing play in admissions? Now, overall, a good SAT score is very important. None of the serious schools will take you, without a pretty good standardized test score, with very few exceptions, because what they want to do is benchmark your ability across the world. Here in South Africa, they want to see, compared to say kids in Russia or kids in China or kids in New York, what's your ability like? And so if you don't have an SAT score or an ACT score, it's very hard to make that comparison, which is why, most of the schools in the top 50 in America require one of these 2 tests. Now there's a bit of a trend away from taking these tests in rare occasions, and why that exists is because if you're a low-income student from, say, the African-American community in Nebraska in the US, and you can't afford to prepare for the test, you can't afford to hire a tutor, etc., you're at a bit of a disadvantage in that process. So top schools are sort of waiving the requirement to submit this in some cases, but given you're at a pretty amazing school here, you probably should be submitting that test. Now, here's Princeton as an interesting stat. So let's say you've got, for example, a 1500 SAT score, or the top 100 points in the SAT. It shows your odds of getting in are about 8%, which is almost 50% higher than if you score between 1380 to 1490. You can see as you get down to sort of the 1100 range, your odds of getting in are sort of 1%, and those kids are going to be like insane sports people, like national champion sports people. So what you want to do is really maximize your scores, but bear in mind that testing is not everything. And the big differentiator here to get into schools like Princeton and Columbia, and I've sent more than 220 kids to the Ivy League now, are students that have fantastic extracurriculars, good leadership, great sports. They're ticking all those boxes. I spoke to a student, very talented, at a school in Cape Town yesterday. He was in grade 10. He was doing 3 A-levels online, and he was in the South African National International Young Physicists Tournament and the National Debate Team, and he's shooting for Harvard in a couple of years. So obviously, you want to aim high if you're shooting for the very, very top schools, but there are so many good options in America. Let's keep going. So what makes a good personal statement essay to think about? Here's a quote from Yale's admissions office. When you write your essays and short answer responses, write about something that really matters to you. Use your own voice. Pick topics that give us an idea of who you are. And your perspective, the lens through which you view a topic, is far more important than the topic itself. So I wrote a funny essay about working at a burger shop called a Porto's. This is like Nando's. If you guys like Nando's, I definitely do. And a Porto's basically is like a even more fast food version of that. So I worked there over the summer, flipping burgers, making chicken tenders, etc. I was pretty bad at it. I burned a lot of burgers, and also I used a lot of the wrapping. And my boss, who was a very conservative or cheap business guy, kept telling me off every time I wasted one of his 2-cent pieces of paper. So it was a really interesting experience, very humbling, because I was pretty bad at the job, to be honest. And that was my funny main essay that I used to apply for Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, all these schools. And so you can see that you don't have to be necessarily serious in all parts of your application. Obviously your academics and stuff is very crucial, but your personality must show through. Here's some quotes from Harvard. We want to get a glimpse of who you are, not who you think we want you to be. Relax. We just want to get to know you better. So be aware of this. Typically you want to spend about 4 to 6 months in your last year drafting these essays, working on them, developing them. That's pretty important. So for these essays, basically life experiences, academics, extracurriculars, all the stuff, what you've actually done at school has to combine with how you convey it. That together brings a pretty nice personal statement. Now, if we move along to what are some good extracurriculars in the US process, in a South African context, when I say extracurriculars, a couple of things will jump to your mind usually. Typically things like prefect, house captain, head boy, head girl, club leader. These are the things we hear about a lot. But the good thing is when you apply for the US, they really value those things, but they also value the second category of innovative leadership. And this includes things like creating your own club, creating a project. So for example, one of my kids in Shanghai has built this app, which basically, if you press it, it tells you how many cigarettes you smoked equivalently by sitting in Shanghai that day with the air quality. So it's supposed to raise awareness of pollution, which is very interesting. I've got a girl in New Zealand right now who actually is doing an art exhibit in a couple of days to raise money for charities that work on discrimination, because with the rise of the coronavirus, there's lots of discrimination towards the Chinese community. So that's a really interesting project. So projects like this, let's say at school, I don't know, for example, maybe you don't have an artificial intelligence club, but you've loved artificial intelligence, you've been reading about that online, you could create that club. And that kind of innovation is really powerful. So you don't have to be a head boy or a head girl to make this work. Both categories are very important. And probably for my profile to the US, about half my leadership stuff were in the second category over here. So here's an example of a pretty incredible candidate. I want to show you sort of an all-star candidate because you may as well always aim high. This is one of my students who's gone to Stanford from Silicon Valley, which is very difficult. Silicon Valley is the term for San Francisco, Palo Alto, which is the tech hub of America and probably the world. So this student basically, over 4 years of high school, so she comes from a pretty low-income village in India, and the water quality is very bad. You can't drink the water. So she actually worked with a professor to build this chemical substrate that filters out bacteria from water, and actually she patented this technology. So what this means is that she actually has, contributed her own innovative idea to this field of how to filter water, and she spent several years on this project, and that basically became her hallmark achievement when applying to Stanford. Next up, you have 2 clubs she created. She created a gender equality and politics club. She wants to go into politics in the future, and in America, she wants to get more women involved in politics. So over the course of 2 years, she basically built this club to more than 100 members. She also got involved in this thing called the sustainability group, which she started. So over 3 Sundays, she got a bunch of her friends, not too stressful, out to the beach to just clean up the beach, clean up some of the litter, some of the rubbish, etc. And that was part of the initiative. She also arranged a farmers market where she brought on about 20 companies that sells eco-friendly goods, sustainable goods, things like this, and then about 200 students along to that collaboration. She also did research for 3 summers. So in South Africa, huge opportunity for you guys to do some research. Most kids are not doing it in South Africa right now, but if you do a bit of academic research online, we've got 40 professors that can work with you online, or local university professors here. That's going to boost your odds to both the UK and the US. So she did 3 of those different types of projects, and then she was involved in this charity called Cake for Kids. An important thing you guys have got to realize, let's say you've got a hobby like, say, baking. Now, I suck at baking, but this girl is very, very good at baking. When she told me that she liked baking, I asked her, what can we do to show Stanford, show these top schools how much you love this passion? And she told me about this charity she was involved in, this foster care charity. And so what we ended up doing is she created this thing called Cake for Kids. And on these children's birthday, because they don't have parents, they're moving from house to house, her volunteers will send them a birthday cake on their birthday to make sure it gets there on the day. So they basically have a lovely birthday surprise. And it's all baked by fellow girls from her high school. And that's a good way to combine her hobby of baking with a social impact project. So that's kind of like Stanford quality. Now, of course, this is a pretty good candidate, but it goes to show kind of over 4 years what a top candidate may be aiming towards building. It's very inspiring. Now, our student that just got into the Ivy League school, Brown, it didn't have extracurriculars like this. They had some very good extracurriculars, but maybe not to this level. But this shows you kind of what like a perfect rubric would look like, basically. So how do admissions officers make these decisions? There's a couple of characteristics. Intellectual potential. They want to know not how well you are doing right now necessarily, but how well will you do when you go to a top US university or a top UK university. Extracurriculars, personal qualities, and then institutional priorities. So when applying to the US, with your high school transcript, they want to know about, are there any lapses? Were you working hard for 2 years, then maybe you got distracted, and then your grades dropped. Those lapses, they want to understand where they came from. They want to understand outliers. Maybe you're really good overall, but you really were struggling in language this year. Or maybe you were actually really good at computer science, but your maths, not so strong. They want to know about that. Trajectory. So are your grades improving over time, or are they declining over time? These are really important to understand. It's okay if your grades when you were 14 weren't too hot, but you don't want to see your grades declining, because that's definitely a bad signal for the universities. You want to show your class standing, how well you perform relative to your classmates, and also standardized testing. Be aware the top schools will also require subject tests, which are 1 hour long multi-choice tests, and things like math, English, sciences, and languages. So bear in mind, you can actually apply to some schools like NYU with only subject tests. So quickly on the UK. Now, the UK is a fantastic option. Now, the UK is actually quite similar to South Africa, in that when you apply for university, you commit to one degree. It could be law, it could be medicine, it could be commerce, it could be arts, whatever you're committing to. But the whole degree is in one area, typically 3 years. Now, there's about 24 schools in the UK that I'd really recommend and endorse strongly. These are called the Russell Group universities. These are schools that I would personally consider, and I think many of them are going to be stronger than some of the options here locally and are worth you kind of putting the money and going to. So 60% of all doctorates in the UK are awarded to these schools, and about 30% of all international students from outside the EU go to these schools. So this includes Cambridge, Oxford, obviously these big names, as well as schools like Durham, Manchester, etc. So the UK is looking for a scholar. The UK actually does not mind about whether you're doing sports, extracurriculars, whatever. They want to see you nail the academics. That's going to be the most important thing. So let's say you just absolutely love engineering. Power to you. Go hard in engineering and don't worry about anything else. If your goal is Cambridge engineering or, for example, UCL engineering, Imperial engineering, that's what you can focus on. Now, in the UK, 75% of the story is academics. Your IB, NSC, A-levels, IB, etc. Standardized testing is relevant to only some skills for certain degrees like law and medicine. You've got only one recommendation letter, not two. And then you've got some leadership projects, but these have to relate to what you're applying for. So when I applied to economics at Cambridge, only my extracurriculars to do with, say, macroeconomics, research that I did to do with economics really mattered. I didn't include many of my activities because the UK is not very interested in them. And then, application essays have to be pretty straightforward. For Oxford and Cambridge, it's a bit more interesting. 20% of the story is interviews. So when you apply to Oxford and Cambridge, 4 out of 5 candidates get offered an interview, but only one of the 5 will end up getting in. So 20% get in ultimately, overall. And the extracurriculars are pretty important. So when you apply for the UK, basically 1st of October is the medicine deadline, halfway through October is the Oxford-Cambridge deadline, and then halfway through January is the general deadline for everything else. So you typically want to consider applying to both the US and UK if you can. I applied to both countries. It makes a lot of sense because, a lot of candidates have got some idea of what they want to do in the UK, but they're not sure. So some good options in the US is pretty healthy too. So I would say in South Africa, the majority of our students apply to both, but it's also pretty normal to apply to just one of these two countries. So a good personal statement in the UK. When I think of Americans as a Kiwi, and I spend a lot of time in America, so maybe I can say this, Americans are full of bravado, sort of exaggeration, enthusiasm, business acumen, etc. I'm from the UK originally with my family. The UK is much more matter-of-fact, blunt, conservative, understated, and the application process kind of mimics this. In the US, you really have to sell yourself. In the UK, your essay is a lot more to the point. You write, why you want to study economics, where the interest came from, what activities you want to do, why you want to do it in the future, what your goals are for the future. It's very to the point. The US, you don't actually even talk about what you want to study in the application essays for most of the schools, which is quite funny. So this is going to be 80 to 90% to do with the academics you're applying for at the university. and you're going to keep your non-course related extracurriculars to quite a minimum, and you want to be pretty succinct with your word choice. It's only 600 words long. So in the UK, the nuts and bolts for how to stand out is just nail the academics. Students that are getting all A's is very useful for Oxford, Cambridge. You want to be academically serious, doing things like university level reading in your last 2 years, taking part in competitions, all of that will help you. Of course, humility is important because when you go to Oxford, Cambridge, there's a tutorial system. There's one professor for one student, or 1 to 2, and they want to coach you and develop you. So if you're kind of, you don't want to learn, or you're quite stubborn, that's not going to be very, good for that kind of environment. So they want someone who's very, keen to learn and develop. Right now, I've sent more than 1,000 students to top universities around the world, and so I'm seeing top kids in Silicon Valley, in Shanghai, in London, New York, having these careers. And so I want to share with you quickly what some of them are doing, and what are the main trends that I'm seeing. So we've got research. This is becoming very popular. People going to PhDs and working in top laboratories, industry, going to work in business, etc. Entrepreneurship. Now I want to touch on this. One interesting trend, when I was growing up, my mum or dad, when they were 20, they couldn't create a company. No one would invest in a business for people so young. The world's changed these days. I have students in Silicon Valley now. 2 of my students have raised each about 140,000 US dollars, or about 2.5 million rand, at age 22 to run their own startup companies in Silicon Valley, going to this thing called Y Combinator. There are many investors that want to invest in young talent who understand technology, who understand the way the world is moving. And as a result, if you guys want to actually build your own business rather than work for somebody, that is actually much more doable today than it ever was before. So for example, Crimson, we've raised so far more than 1 billion rand to expand Crimson across 23 countries. We've got more than 300 staff, and my co-founders are all 24 years old, which is not much older than you guys. So there's nothing stopping you if you want to go ahead and build a company to do that. That's a very popular trend. Finance, this has grown quite a lot. Now, on the next slide, basically, I want to point to this middle thing, interplanetary exploration. Now that sounds kind of ridiculous, like some science fiction movie, but the reality is in the US right now, you've got Jeff Bezos from Amazon investing in Blue Origin, Elon Musk, investing in SpaceX. He's the guy that founded Tesla, if you like Tesla cars. And then Richard Branson investing in Virgin Galactic. These are all private space companies trying to get people to go to space. They're already launching rockets to lift up satellites, etc. So I have a number of students doing aeronautical engineering working for these space companies right now in the US. So if you're interested in space, this is no longer like a far-flung fantasy. You can actually do this. It's very popular amongst the engineering skills. Overall, artificial intelligence is also quite big. So what does top really mean? Basically, top to me is a skill that actually is best fit for you. So at a school like Harvard or Stanford, around 80% of candidates that apply end up taking the offer. At some of the lower ranked schools in America, ranked say, around 200th in the world, often their yield rate's about 10%, which means for every 10 kids that get in, only 1 takes the offer. So this is the crucial stat to figure out if the school you're applying for is actually, useful. Now, if you look at these different things, other things, are you ready to commit? So when you apply for the university, when you think about the school, do you know what you want to study, or are you still unsure? If you're unsure, think about probably the US, and if you're pretty sure, the UK is a good option for you. Law and medicine, UK is great because you can start your degree straight away and it's a Commonwealth system. Last thing I'll touch on is just where are our alumni. So now it's been 7 years, I've seen all these kids going through the Crimson system to these top universities, and it's been pretty inspiring. So right now we've got kids, let's take this company, Google DeepMind. This is Google's top artificial intelligence team. They're working on the algorithms that, if you've seen Terminator, the movie, one of my students is working in the artificial intelligence safety team, designed to stop these AI algorithms getting out of control, literally working on stopping the Terminator problem, which is pretty cool. He's 22, and he's on a salary of 210,000 US dollars, having finished his Oxford undergrad degree and a Cambridge master's degree. So this is more than CEOs get paid in New Zealand. So I think, in this tech artificial intelligence field, job opportunities are amazing. Over on Wall Street, you've got Goldman Sachs, management consulting firms like McKinsey, companies like SoftBank, and also charities like UNICEF, where kids are doing amazing humanitarian work, and that's actually a very popular area of field for our graduates. So what I want to say, guys, to wrap up is, high school can be pretty intense. My last year in high school was actually harder than Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Wall Street, or building this company. It was an intense academic year, but it's really worth it. It's worth putting in the effort because these years play a dramatic role on your career, the opportunities you have access to, what countries you're going to live in, and you may as well go hard because you can always choose to go for a more relaxed option, but you want to feel like you gave it your best shot. I certainly did in high school, and I recommend all you guys, make the most of this. You're in an incredible school with very great resources, so I would say, make the most of every day and realize that, for the rest of your life, you'll think back about high school and the decisions you made, and it will have a big snowball impact. So, go hard and leverage all the resources you have here and get the best outcome you can. We'll be cheering you on for sure. Thank you.